Revived Thoughts is a production of Revive Studios.
This is Troy and Joel, and you are listening to Revive Thoughts.
And let us not think it is far off from us. It is already here upon us in these lands. It is Christianity itself that is challenged as the great despotism.
Every episode, we bring you a different voice from history and a sermon that they delivered. Today, we're going back to a sermon. It was preached in the year 1919 in New Zealand by a man named Rutherford Waddell.
Rutherford.
Oh, I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. Rutherford Waddell. New Zealand. Is this the first New Zealand pin we have on our map, Troy?
Yes. Thank you for saying that, Joel. I wanted to let you know, if you're checking the Revive Thoughts map, you should go to revivethoughts.com. Check out that map. It is an amazing amount of episodes that between Revive Thoughts and Martyrs and Missionaries and our other programs, we have covered so many spots in the world. And this is finally getting New Zealand on the map for Revive Thoughts. Now, it's not the first time for the studio. We released it in an episode on the history of Christianity in New Zealand. That's also very good. But this is getting New Zealand on there, and the person who's speaking this sermon, part of the reason we went in this direction was because he is from New Zealand as well. He's got a strong New Zealand accent, and so we thought that would pair really nicely to just be able to cover an area that we have never really covered before. So that was pretty cool.
Absolutely. We got some positive feedback to talk about.
We do, Joel. This one comes from Richard R. on Spotify. It says, working my way through the archives, this sermon by Ambrose has been one of the best so far. Amazing to hear how God sovereignly works despite man for his glory and our good. Thanks, Revive Thoughts team. Thank you for listening. And I will also say, if you have not listened to that sermon by Ambrose from about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, definitely check it out. It's super cool. Ambrose gave that sermon during a siege, and he just preaches his heart out. It's an amazing sermon. And if you are tired of waiting for the newest episode each week, remember, Revive Thoughts has hundreds of episodes to go check out, and I think they are many of them are really, really good, and you should go listen to them and learn about some new people you probably don't know very well. Another one came in. I got to be honest with you. I don't know how we got this one. It says 5 out of 5. It's like a review, but I'm not sure if it's on Apple Podcasts. I didn't see it on the U.S. Apple Podcast, but that doesn't mean it's not on one of the other ones. Or it came through our website, so here I'm reading it, but I'm not sure how this review got to us. Praise God for this ministry, 5 out of 5. I am a pastor working my way through seminary, and I found you guys on one of my long drives to church where I minister at. I instantly fell in love with the historical context of my favorite ministers like Flavel, Owen, and McChain. Hey, glad you like McChain. We have some good news for you coming up then. Their sermons, the music, your humor, everything. I am currently thinking about starting a small ministry at my church where I would read a Puritan prayer, say something about a Puritan, and preach one of their sermons once a month, all inspired by you guys. Your ministry has edified me and much in my walk with Christ, and I pray that it would edify many more to come. Praise God for you and your ministry, and may the Lord bless you going forth. Thank you, Corrado. I got to say, I am really touched by that, and I really hope you do. And we have heard from other people who are reading sermons out there and taking these old sermons and sharing with them. And honestly, nothing makes me more happy than to hear that people are not only being inspired by these great old sermons, but they're taking them out into the world, sharing them, reading them from pulpits, or reading them to friends, or sending them around. That's just... I don't want to keep this wisdom locked up. We got to get it out there to the world. And so when I hear something like that, I am just thrilled. I hope that more people will join you, and that this will become a thing where the church starts getting into these old sermons at large, because I think we need it. One more. This one came to us, I think, on YouTube, and it was from our Revived conversation. Joel and I were talking. I mentioned Matthew Henry, and I mentioned the secret for me, which was I kept mentioning Matthew Henry in all my Bible papers because he was the only one that came up. He was the first one that would come up on Google. And this person said, I would be the person who quoted Charles Spurgeon and John Calvin quite frequently, not Matthew Henry, smiley face. So, hey, Robert Sparkman, you were doing better than I was out there. You were quoting the big dogs. I didn't start quoting those guys until an embarrassingly long amount of time.
Matthew Henry, like his commentaries, for some reason, were like public domain. Like so all of the commentary sites had it plugged in by default as like the free commentary version that anyone could watch. And so that whoever was in charge of his estate knew like that's how you get name recognition out there.
For a guy who's been dead for 300 years, his PR team really took to the internet well and got his name back out there for everyone. And we honestly should have an episode with him on. Now that I think about it, we haven't done that. So
it's true. We don't have a Matthew Henry.
I mean, what an embarrassing thing that the team hasn't his PR team hasn't reached out to us. It's on them.
We'll have our people call their people. We'll get it sorted.
There we go.
All right, today we're talking about Rutherford Waddell. While known for his ministry in New Zealand, actually born in Ireland. He's an Irish guy, born in the year 1850, and if you know anything about Ireland in the 1850s, you know this is the heat of the bad times and the potato famine. So rough time. We covered C.H. Mackintosh, who was also a minister during the potato famine. There's a little bit more information on that episode as well, but not a great time to be in Ireland. His mother died around this time, and I don't know if it was directly related to starvation, or there's also a cholera outbreak that was hitting the region around that time as well, so it may have been from cholera as well. But all these things kind of compound and feed into each other to make it just a not great time. You have famine, you have illness, you have sickness. People were getting out of Ireland. His father was a minister, and he did eventually remarry and have more kids, and so Rutherford would have had a stepmother, but really it was his aunt that he looked up to, the sister of his biological mother. That was his mother figure. Waddell hated school growing up. He would try to cut class whenever he could, however he could. By the age of 14, he kind of gave up on school and worked a store counter, and he would work very long hours just to try to make ends meet, and that was his life. He was content with.
Joel, at some point, Waddell here, he became a Christian. Now, he said he grew up in a Christian home, but his first 18 years, he just didn't have that much interest in God. However, it says that a sermon from a strange preacher at a strange church in a strange place. That's not my quote. That was the quote from the article I was reading. So if that sounded weird to you, if that sounded strange to you, that's how it was worded. Really made his eyes open to the need for God. I would love to know more information. What sermon? What was this specifically? We don't know. And from there, it says that his brother then helped aid him in coming to Christ. But even the way that was worded, I couldn't tell if his brother was like a strong Christian and pushed him into the faith, or if like his brother was a bad example and made him wake up to the reality of needing Jesus. The answer is we're just not sure. But either way, these two things happened around his 18th year and brought him into the faith. He joins his father and his maternal grandfather in the family trade of being a Presbyterian minister. So again, we say he grew up in a Christian home, his dad was a Presbyterian minister. He then went to school and graduated, but when he graduated, there was no job for him. He couldn't find any work as a pastor. Nothing was really opening up for him. He then tried to become a missionary, but he kind of got rejected from the mission boards at the time too. It's after a while, finally an opportunity opened up for him, but it was not in Ireland. It was in New Zealand. Elise, as I mentioned earlier, did a history on the episode of New Zealand. I really think it's a good one. And I mean, how many other podcasts do you know that have covered the history of Christianity in New Zealand? But if you want to get an idea for what it was like in the 1800s to be a Christian there and what kind of spiritual climate you're going into, I definitely think you should check that out because it's an interesting episode because New Zealand, it did sound like it had a pretty rough time getting the gospel to it, and some big misfires happened there. But anyway, you'll need to listen to that episode to kind of get more of the history of that.
So in 1877, he took this relatively poor post out in New Zealand. He arrived and it kind of hit things off with his congregation. They really seemed to like him. They really bond. So just kind of this smaller, poor little community that he was able to minister to. It seems like have a good rapport with the people there. He was a bit of a Christian socialist, which makes him a little bit controversial, as we usually don't cover socialists on Revive Thoughts. But
personally, I'm against him myself. If I could just put that out. I know it's bold to take that stance with the Church History podcast, but I will go ahead and say I would normally not want them on the show. But there is his case. As you will see, and as you enjoy, I think, listening to more of his history, I think you'll understand why we kind of made this one exception.
He seems to be, well, and he goes through different eras of life, and you can kind of see his opinions and feelings on things evolve over time, but largely he does seem to be somewhat of an anti-government socialist, like his motivations seem to be stemmed from his poor upbringing and his desire to see people help the poor and a desire for the community to help that rather than the government helping. He doesn't want the government to be empowered to do this. He thinks the people, should rise up and do this. So that thing comes to things like anti-alcoholism. He was very much anti-alcohol. He took a pledge to abstain from himself and would encourage the people around him to do so. And so this is kind of like a little vignette of his interaction with government bodies. That's interesting. You can kind of see how it changes over time, but there was a point where he was very much against having Bibles in public schools. He didn't want Bibles to be included in public schools in his reasoning. So again, we're talking about New Zealand specifically here. He's looking back on his own past, and he sees he was raised in a Catholic school, and he felt like it was not a great experience. He didn't want the state to teach religion. He thought that was a pretty dangerous thing. He wanted that separation of church and state. And this was like a pretty important talking point for him, where he was pretty stern on it. But it's something he changed his mind on over the years. Several years would go by and he'd argue back and forth. Eventually, he kind of flipped the script and decided that he did think Bibles should be in schools. He became a proponent of it, citing that this is the most important book anyone can read. I kind of got the sense, maybe kind of surrendering it to the Lord, let the Lord use this book in these people's lives, even if systematically it might be being curated and delivered in ways that he had a bad experience with in the past. Fascinating, I thought, to see. We don't often see people in Revived Thoughts change their mind on things, especially on political issues, kind of like this. And so it was kind of interesting, a little bit refreshing to see someone have thoughts. And I feel like on both sides, I understood where he was coming from, how you would have one point and then have that change as you change as a person, as you get older. Yeah,
so I thought that was a pretty good example of, okay, this guy is not the way you would normally think of when you think of that term. Now, the amount of charities Waddell was involved in was exhausting to research. You don't normally try to list everything they do, and this was just one of those guys that's happened sometimes where I just go, I give up. I cannot list everything in one episode. It would be just such a long laundry list of activities. I don't know how he did it. New Zealand was going through a very bad depression, especially when he got there. So his church was running food banks, mission halls, libraries, savings banks, kindergartens, and what they called cultural centers, and everything else they could think of to try to reach the people, take care of the needs of the people, and bring them to Christ. He also had a very passionate crusade against sweatshops and child labor, a problem in New Zealand at the time I didn't know about, and he gave a sermon called On the Sin of Cheapness that basically took the country by storm and really changed everybody's perspective. And had I known that beforehand, I probably would have picked that sermon to be the one that we read, but this sermon basically was how you're enjoying all these cheap goods, but the way you get those cheap goods is on the backs of poor people who are absolutely suffering, on the backs of people who are getting treated like dirt, and you're enjoying all your cheap goods and acting like it doesn't come from a bad source. And honestly, I read that and I looked at some of the sermon and thought, oof, there's some truth for that to us today still. I mean, it is not something that has completely gone away, that the world we live in is built with a lot of cheapness, and some of that cheapness comes at the expense of human suffering. And Waddell was very, very much convinced that if we are Christians, we need to be better with how we use our money. And if we're constantly feeding into a machine that hurts people, we are a part of that process.
You're starting to sound like a socialist over there, Troy. I don't know. You better watch yourself.
I gotta say, there's one thing I'm not worried about becoming is a socialist. I feel pretty convinced that is about as unlikely as a thing can be.
Between all of his lectures and preaching and book writing, he was a very busy man, very exhausted man. I was reading that he had an average of 4 hours of sleep a night with all of his activities, which is not enough. You need more hours of sleep. That is too little of a sleep. So he was a busy pastor. He was involved in his community. There's this particularly sad and tragic interaction that we see with him in his congregation, where there was a couple in his congregation that was getting a divorce. And this was in 1880, and the father didn't want to pay child support towards his wife, and so they were meeting with Waddell, and he was trying to counsel them, but the husband was getting more and more angry and was starting to threaten Waddell and his ex-wife here, and things were getting violent and disturbing, and Waddell tried to get the police involved, saying, "Hey, this man is unstable here." It sounds like before anything could have been done, this man, sadly, there was a day in which his wife was walking home one day, and the ex-husband ran up, grabbed his wife, and with a stick of dynamite, pulled a stick of dynamite out of his hand and held it together with him and his wife and blew them both up, and did a murder-suicide there, killed them both with that explosion there. Rough on Waddell. This was, an interaction, a counseling journey that he was heavily involved in, and these were people in his congregation, and he would officiate the wife's funeral. And so I don't know, when I see people that are stressed with ministry or having a hard time with ministry, it's stories like this that make me think it could be worse. You could have some pretty and I mean, obviously there are pretty intense scenarios like this that happen in today's day and age, but that's some pretty heavy ministering that this man is going through there.
Yeah, I mean, you would just, if you did not turn it over to Christ, you would have some huge guilt. Like, did I do enough? So that just would be tough. Another big event in his life happened in the 1890s, where he had to help defend his friend in a heresy trial. There was a big Presbyterian court council had, which they did have back in those days. It wasn't like they would go to jail or get killed or anything, but the Presbyterian church could basically remove this person from office. And we actually mentioned all of this in our episode on J. Gresham Machen a long time ago, because he also went through a similar trial. But this one sounds interesting. You hear a heresy trial, you go, okay, he's defending heretics. What's going on here? Well, the big heresy this guy was in trouble for was saying that he believed that when babies died, it was not certain that babies would go to hell. They might go to heaven. And when I hear that, that's what he's on trial for. I go, oh, that, I don't, apparently at the time, and maybe still, I'm not sure. I didn't look it up actually, but it was kind of assumed that if a baby died, they went to hell. And to question that would get you a heresy trial, as this guy was under. And Waddell basically said, this is an old doctrine. Many people believe it to be true, maybe, but there are lots of people who also don't believe it to be true, and they teach it publicly, but privately, when you talk to them, they say, I don't actually believe this, but I have to teach it this way. He said, so why is this guy in trouble for saying publicly what most of us are saying privately? It doesn't seem fair. And his friend did get acquitted. They basically said, yeah, okay, you're right. We shouldn't call you a heretic for that one. Waddell was also worked to make wives divorcing their husbands easier in a case of drunkenness and abuse. And when you hear the earlier story that Joel mentioned, you could probably see why he wanted to do that. Apparently at the time, it was very easy in New Zealand for a husband to divorce their wife, but it was very, very difficult for a wife, likewise, to divorce their husband. And Waddell was basically like, look, divorce is bad, but if a woman's being abused and has a drunk husband and can't get out of the marriage, that's also really, really bad for her safety and for everything else. So we shouldn't have this one standard for men. They can basically walk out whenever, but this other standard for women where they can't seem to get away from their abusive husbands. Let's try to make things more equal. All of these things and many, many more Waddell was involved in. He was an important and influential person in ministry at the time. And he ended up living till the year 1917. He dies there towards the end of World War I. But even in this sermon, you'll hear him talk a little bit about World War I. He's preaching all the way, it looks like, to the very end of his life. In this sermon, now enjoy, it says, "Till the stars appear."
Nehemiah 4 verse 21. So we labored at the work from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. This is my 40th anniversary in this congregation. I select these words as suitable for some thoughts for the occasion. So we labored at the work. The work, what was it? We know what it was for Nehemiah. We will not dwell on that. We want to ask what it is for us. The work. How shall we name it? Let us go straight to the Master. We shall let the Lord Christ tell us. In John 6:29, Jesus answered them, This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. Every word there is pregnant with the profoundest significance. Has sent. He has come into it from the other side. He is not a human evolution, but a divine gift. This is the starting point, and it carries everything else with it. And so we labored at the work. And this is the work, that you believe on him whom he has sent. That is primary. That is fundamental. If you go wrong there, ruin awaits you everywhere. Is not that what this war has been writing out for us in lines of blood and fire? We are watching with awe the doom of civilizations that forget it. They thought they could repair human nature without divine aid. They thought they could build the holy city, the New Jerusalem, by the untempered mortar of human wisdom and power, and their towering Babels have buried them beneath the ruin. And what is true of nations is true of individuals, is true for each of us. When we come to ask what life means, we must start here. This is the work of God, that you believe on him whom he has sent. Multitudes do not do that. Spurgeon was once staying at an Italian inn. The floor was dreadfully dirty. He thought he would like to get it scrubbed, but, looking at it, he perceived that it was made of mud, and the more scrubbing, the worse it would be. That is humanity in its natural condition. It wants regeneration before it can get reformation. It wants to be washed before it is starched. It requires to be washed white rather than whitewashed. It needs the new man before it can get to the Superman. It must be brought under the power of a higher self, that is God, than its own, if it is to achieve the end of its creation. This is the work of God. There are other works, any amount, but they can only be perceived and achieved when you start right, when you realize that this is the primary and fundamental business. This is the work of God, that you believe on him whom he has sent. Then you can go on to construct character and build the New Jerusalem successfully, not otherwise. And so we labored at the work. Labored. Yes, the work needs labor. Nehemiah and his friends were beset by foes fearsome and formidable. And so it has always been, and today more than ever. The war against the enemies of the spiritual life without us and within us is a war in which there is no discharge. It is the constant and special business of the ministry to direct and inspire it. It is true that in these days, in certain quarters, the work of the clergyman is ranked among the unproductive employments. A certain 4-year-old cousin of mine, whose father was a minister, confided to his mother one day that he was going to be a train driver. After a time, that ideal faded out, and then he told her that he was going to be a minister, like her father, or like father, and do nothing. That is the popular notion of the minister. A section of modern democracy, assuming the premises, goes to the logical conclusion thus, as I read recently in an Australian newspaper. To quote it, "When will the people seriously wake up to the fact that these priesthoods, and in particular the Christian variety, are the enemies of liberty and general social well-being?" End quote. To some extent, this superficial idea is justified. The results of spiritual work are the last to appear. They are the final products of evolution, and critics in a hurry do not make allowance for this. So the minister is misjudged. But his severest judge is himself. There is possibly no other profession in which a man may do so much or so little, be so lazy or so laborious. For 40 years I have been living my life and trying to do my work amongst you. Of the character and quality of that work it does not become me to speak. I will only say this, that in one form or another, the spirit of Ruskin's true and terrible words have ever haunted me. To quote Ruskin, "It is the doing of good work that is the entrance of all princedoms. It is not done. If it is not done, the day will assuredly come when those who have shirked labour must labour for evil instead of good." And so we laboured at the work. We laboured. Yes, we. Marketable honey is the product of a hive of bees, not of a single bee. It has been my good fortune during all these years to have had the cooperation of scores of men and women of high character and far vision. Nothing is more remarkable than the way in which losses have been made good, and the blanks of ranks filled up as the years went by. The individual waves of the sea are perpetually breaking and thinning away from less and less to nothing, but new ones ever take their place, and the succession never ceases. Life's a vast sea that does its mighty errand without fail. Panting is unchanged strength, though waves be failing. And so it has been during all the 40 years of ministry of this church. I have had the pleasure and honour of being associated with as fine a company of labourers as ever any minister possessed. The dry records of these years in cold print may not seem to count for much, but Sir Robertson Nicoll says truly that the pages of a church report may be prosaic enough on the surface, but to those who understand what they mean, they are full of a heavenly poetry. To quote him, "The collection of the money, the giving of the money, the keeping up of the societies, the Sunday school teaching, the Bible classes, the help in the choir, the visiting, the prayer meetings, the unbroken, hopeful, wistful attendance at divine services. How good these all are! We do not recognize the workers as we should, nor do we acknowledge the value of their work. I am sure the Lord thinks very differently from many of their sniffing critics. What these critics do for the regeneration of the world has never been clear to me. What is clear is this, that it is the work of the church in the field, the unnoticed, regular, obscure work that has kept the soul alive in England." And end quote. And it has done the same in New Zealand, and it has kept the soul alive these 40 years in this church. All honour to that gallant succession. But great and good as all this has been, something more will be needed for the future. A new age is breaking upon us. It demands new energy. We are moving into a time that will test the church as it has never been tested before. Dark days are ahead of us. We have ended one war, but another is upon us, even more ominous than that which is over. We are all watching with wonder and awe the advance of Bolshevism. A shrewd Russian writer aptly named it an Asiatic despotism under a communistic label. Dr. Fitchett of Melbourne says it has in it a strain as fierce and as cruel as that of the caliphs, who in its early days carried Mohammedanism by the sword over 3/4 of the civilized world, and threatened at one moment to overwhelm Christianity. And its relentless advance threatens to be as irresistible as the slide of a glacier. Marshal Foch compares it to the green, slow-drifting poison gas that Germany invented and used to the horror of mankind. What its principles are, we need not here inquire. It is enough to say that it is out to make an end of Christian civilization as it understands it. Let it be willingly admitted that there is much in that so-called civilization that needs imperatively to be destroyed. But if the Christianity of Christ disappears from the world, then chaos and primeval night will come again, and nothing less than that is the peril that threatens us today. And let us not think it is far off from us. It is already here upon us, in these lands. It is not simply that stark atheism and materialism are being preached by pen and speech among the masses. It is Christianity itself that is challenged as the great despotism. Our nation will never be safe. I am quoting from an Australian Labour newspaper. Our nation will never be safe for honest men and women until the cross is on the ground. That emblem of tyranny stains the atmosphere. End quote. That is the sort of teaching that is filtering down among the masses of these lands. It is well the church should know where its enemies are and what they mean. And beyond and behind all these, again, is the whole Oriental world, China, India, Japan, and the races of Africa. If these vast hordes of mankind are not Christianized, they will prove to the new civilization what the Huns and Vandals were to the old. The church must put all its forces into the field if it is not to be overwhelmed. It must make an end of its shirkers, its camp followers. They must either get out or get in. There is no room for them elsewhere, and the church must gird itself as never before for a fight to the finish. Hitherto, it has been merely tiddly-winking with the work. It has been holding its creed as a perhaps, and its faith as a Sunday luxury. Well-dressed congregations have been singing, "Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war," while probably 2/3 of those who sang have never struck a blow for the crown rights of Christ. The war just ended has shown us what fighting is. And when you measure up the numbers, the sacrifice, the money, the endurance, the hardship, the blood, and the death of those who fought the Hun against those who fought for Christ, the contrast is ghastly. All that must be reversed if Christianity is to leaven the world. And if Christianity does not leaven the world, the end is not far off. Dean Church, a quarter of a century or so ago, wrote some words in one of his great books that are applicable today. He said then, to quote, "There are grave reasons for looking forward to the future with solemn awe, but awe is neither despair nor dismay, and Christianity has had dark days before. That faith which has come out alive from the darkness of the 10th century, the immeasurable corruption of the 15th, the religious policy of the 16th, and the philosophy of the 18th may face without shrinking even the subtler perils of our own." End quote. Only let us bear this in mind, that it is not an abstraction or a system or an idea which has to face them. No, it is the plain you and me who believe. We sing, "Truth crushed to earth shall rise again. The eternal years of God are hers, but error, wounded, writhes in pain, and dies amid her worshippers." Yes, all right, but don't you forget this, that truth has failed and will fail again, if not backed by truthful men. Christianity is the truth of God, but it is not self-acting. It must act and operate through its believers, and its believers must be men and women who do not hold tepid opinions about it, but firm convictions. Opinions accomplish nothing. Convictions born of the Holy Spirit transform worlds. And so we labored at the work, from the rising of the morning. That is my next point, from the rising of the morning. When I came here 40 years ago, it was the morning of my ministerial life. I had been only about 16 months in a settled charge. I was very inexperienced, and I knew little comparatively. What I did know was somewhat crude and undigested, but there are things associated with the morning that wise people, such as were given to me, will be patient with. They will remember that the mellow autumn fruits and glorious colours that we see around us here, that these passed through a green and sour stage. And so the morning's light is naturally somewhat raw and unsweet. Youth is ambitious. Few of us learn by the experience of others. We do not start where they left off. We think we shall find our way where everybody else fails. But, if we are sensible, the years bring what Wordsworth calls the philosophical mind. We see much go from us. Many of our bright, brave aims and ideals dissolve in a dripping mist. There come the inevitable disillusionments of life. It sobers and often saddens. The dreams of my youth, writes Hazlitt, came upon me, a glory and a vision, and came no more save in darkness and in sleep. And that is so with many. But for the Christian believer, they are great compensations. A poet of my country sings, "Give me back the wild freshness of morning." Ah, but there may be better things than even the wild freshness of morning. For years and years, as one has well written, for years and years, on to old age, men dream that there is only one kind of happiness, the happiness of our will gratified and our ambitions realized, and the little idols we have set up smiling down upon us. But when they are made wise in the communion of the Holy Spirit, they understand that their blessedness is quite other than that it comes to those who have died to the anarchy of inordinate desire and live the life hidden with Christ in God. End quote. That is true. And now the long day wears to its close. The morning of the meridian are far past, and my face looks to where the days bury the suns in the dear golden west. Oh, to be with thee sinking to thy rest, thy journey done, the world thou leavest blessing thee and blessed, O setting sun, the clouds that near the morning joys forget, again aglow, and leaf and flower with tears of twilight wet, to see thee go. And so we laboured from the rising of the sun till the stars came out. That is my next point, till the stars came out. Lord Wolseley says in his Soldier's Pocket Handbook, quote, "It is most important that the officers should study the almanac well, and keep before them the hours of sunset and sunrise, and of the moon's rising, so that all possible advantage may be reaped by every hour of darkness." End quote. Excellent advice for soldiers of the cross, as well as soldiers of the empire. And so we laboured till the stars came out. What shall we say is the significance of that? Do you remember it is recorded that when God created the stars, he said, among other things, "Let them be for signs." And these stars in the sky of life and labour, of what shall we say they are the signs? For my purpose, I will mention three things. First, they may be taken as the sign of how our work will look at the day's end. It will not end in the great glow of a sunburst, but in the glimmering starlight. Few of us, perhaps, expect that in the rising of the morning, but all who labour seriously know full well that sooner or later, when they have done all, they are but unprofitable servants. They know well how poor and meagre look the results when the light of eternity begins to widen about them. Where have you been, my brother? For I have missed you from the street. I have been away for a night and a day on the Lord God's judgment seat. And what did you find, my brother, when your judging there was done? Weeds in my garden, dust in my doors, and my roses dead in the sun. That is so. We all discover it, if we are earnest, sooner or later. John Eliot, the apostle to the Indians, at the end of his long life said, "My doings have been poor and small and mean, and I will be that man who shall cast the first stone at them." If Eliot could say that of his doings, Eliot, perhaps the most wonderful worker since the days of the apostles, it becomes infinitely lesser ones like myself to say far stronger things of mine. Yes, you reply, humility is so easy where pride is impossible. But God's workers have nothing to be proud of, except God himself. It is he that works in them. All is of him, and so they are, content to fill a little space, if he be glorified. A second thing that the stars may be taken as sign of when they appear in the sky of life and labour is this: they are a prophecy of the end of both in this world. I suppose that after 40 years of work, I ought to feel old, even patriarchal. The funny thing is, I don't, not a bit. My mind is far more alert and active today than it ever was before, and I hope spiritually I have not declined. I think if only the instrument, the body that is, would but respond, say, for 10 years longer, I could do more and better in these 10 years than in the past 40 put together. But I fear I cannot look for that. Browning's words come to me often. Honey and gall of it, there is life lying, and I see all of it, only I'm dying. That is the experience that takes many the consciousness of seeing work that they would like to do and feel they could do better than ever, but they are held back, denied the power to accomplish, and at last know that they must die like a sick eagle looking at the sky. That is the gall of it. And yet there is honey in it, great honey, for is it not one of the strongest proofs of human immortality? So it has been found by many. Study Browning's wonderful poem of Cleon, if you would realize its force and significance. And so I come to the last thing which I will mention as the stars' prophecy. They are prophecy of the light and power and joy of a grander coming day. Whittier, in a beautiful little poem in answer to an address from some of his old schoolmates 27 years ago, ends it up thus: "Hail and farewell, we go our way. Where shadows end, we trust in light. The star that ushers in the night is herald also of the day." Yes, infinitely greater and more glorious day. Is not that just what the stars prophesy? Look up at them as you go out tonight. They appear to you only little thin glimmering pinpoints of light in the ebon sky, while this earth of ours looms vast and mighty beside you. Yet it is just the reverse. Just the reverse. Think of the magnitude and multitude of these stars. Take your stand in imagination on one of them, say, for example, on Sirius, with its flash and flush of many colours. And now, look back on your earth, and what is the size of it? It is the size of a halfpenny, but a halfpenny seen at the distance of 50 million miles. And millions of stars are even vaster than that, vaster than our sun. And then, lest we should be overwhelmed by the might, the magnitude, and the multitude of these immense worlds that we call stars, then, well, what then? Then, lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created these? He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power. Not one is missing. Isaiah 40, verse 26. Yes, and they are all for us, for we are of infinitely more concern to God than the gases and chemical matter of his stars. Oh, the might and yet the tenderness of this glorious God. Listen, he heals up the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. He does that. He who takes up the isles is a very little, and wheels these myriads of suns and stars through his infinitudes of space. And so we gather faith and courage to sing with Browning. Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be, the last of life for which the first was made. Our times are in his hand. Who saith, a whole I planned? Youth shows but half. Trust God, see all, nor be afraid. No, we will not be afraid, though the mountains be removed, and the hills be cast into the sea. And if the smallness of our poor work saddens us sometimes, if our sunrise seems to be merged at the last into the thin shimmer of starlight, may it be over there, who knows? It may take on something of the dimensions of the stars themselves. We may be astonished, as Christ suggests to us in his parable, at the great and gracious commendation which he will give to us, to that which seemed to us here of no consequence at all. And when at last the day comes, as come it must to all, when our sun finally goes west, and the night wind brings up the stream murmurs and scents of the infinite sea, then, if it has been for us, Christ to live, we shall welcome it. Welcome it not in the minor key of Tennyson's Crossing the Bar with its low moans and its dim hope, but rather in the clear triumphant notes of a later singer. Star rise and moonlit peace, the last clear call has come, and silver fingers on the pale brow's fleece beckon the sailor home. No moaning of the bar, but down the tide, the worn sails filling free, the stately spirit bark in fearless pride stands out to sea. Star set and silver sleep, the night wind freshly ablows, as through the pathless silence of the deep the great ship goes. No sadness of farewells, but from the skies, like music faint and far, one gathering shout of triumph swells, and dies beyond the morning star. I conclude with Jude 1:24 and 25. Now to him who is able to keep you from stumbling, and to present you blameless before the presence of his glory with great joy, to the only God our Saviour, through Jesus Christ our Lord, be glory, majesty, dominion and authority, before all time, and now and forever. Amen.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Revived Thoughts. Today's sermon was narrated by Richard Roodt. Big thanks to Richard for reading another sermon for us.
Yeah, if you want to hear more by him, you can check him out as he recently read Zacharias Ursinius for us. So that's 2 episodes for him. Thank you for jumping in. If you enjoyed this episode, you learned something new from it, we ask and would appreciate if you could give us a 5-star review and or leave a comment wherever you're listening. Maybe put a share out on your social media. Let people know about this episode. I almost guarantee you they've never heard a historical sermon from New Zealand before. I wouldn't be surprised if this was the very first one. So we encourage you to do that if you don't mind. And also, if you are somebody who's been thinking about reading old sermons or getting them out to other people, like our friends at the very top of the show we mentioned, please do that. We would love to hear from you and love to hear what you have going on with old sermons in your ministry or in your context. This is Troy and Joel, and this is Revive Thoughts.